Welcome to Minerva. Today we're going to discuss the Knights Templar. We hope to give you enough information that you can go away and then do your own study. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to my co-host Duncan.
Hello.
So, let's get straight into this. A few caveats to begin with though. The Knights Templar is huge, the topic is massive. We appreciate that most of the things we're probably going to talk about today could probably be their own episode.
Yeah.
But we've had some comments from you guys and saying that you wanted us to do this as a whole, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to get into it. So, the first question to ask, I suppose, is who were the Knights Templar? Now, what we're not going to do today is go into lots of detail about the history. There will be lots of Knights Templar history buffs probably watching this. We've got lots of friends like that. So apologies if we do make tiny little errors. But essentially, we're not going to go into real big dates and stuff. We're going to talk about them from a mystery perspective because that's exactly what we do here at Minerva. The story goes, the original story goes that there were 9 knights who agreed to protect the pilgrim routes in Jerusalem or from Europe into Jerusalem. And these 9 knights were from all from nobility, really. They were noble families. They were very wealthy people before they became very poor knights of Christ. And I think for me, one of the most important things, which is only something I found out recently, was that they had all visited the Holy Land prior to setting up this Knights Templar. So just to get straight into the mystery, did they have some prior knowledge from the Holy Land? And if not, why did they form?
Prior knowledge of what? In the sense of something there to find? Are we going down that line?
Yeah, something there to find. Did they? Was there a reason? Did they go to the Holy Land and find out that there was King Solomon's treasure, or there were other treasures to be found? Was there? Was that what sparked the reason to start this, or was it something else?
I think it's something else, but I do think that you're quite right. The previous visits emphasised something for them. Right. I mean, the order says it was created to protect the pilgrims on the pilgrims' roads, as you say.
Yeah.
And when they visited and they were there, they would have seen the reality of this. I think the trouble we have at the moment is we see countries of the world at the moment, as we do. We see there's a country, and if you invade that country, you invade the country. And that's not how the world was during this period. You had principalities where the city was something in itself. There was the country, but you never really took the country. You took the cities. And that wasn't just a strategic thing. That was the points that you conquered. Which means even if you took the cities, you didn't actually take over the country. And so when the pilgrims did come across, they did go to one first safe haven. Then, of course, they want to go to the next safe haven. And the journey between the two is pretty much like no man's land. And so the pilgrims, and they would have experienced it during their visits, that, it was perilous for a pilgrim to get to Jerusalem from one city to another. And I think that's the other thing we really don't appreciate. When we think of pilgrims, we don't think of them actually putting their lives in danger. We take as the emotional sacrifice of, I am going to walk this distance. But it wasn't. It was a case of, if you're a devout Christian and you want to walk on the ground that Christ walked on, it was, you were putting your life literally in danger to do it. And so I think as through their visits, they would have seen this devotion. I think the devotion would have been evident anyway. But one thing they would have seen is this sheer risk of doing it. And that, I think, then comes on to the reasoning. You're looking at the early, the latter part of the 12th century, where they're starting to form, which is just the time when we see the romantic notions of chivalry. We have the Roman part where we have the Stoic-like idea of this is a good way to live. But we have the romances, Grail romances started coming out. We have the characters Percival and Gawain, etc. These guys who are devoted to this chivalric order. So for me, I know it sounds, how could they have done it? It doesn't matter whether they wanted to do it. It's almost like that Don Quixote thing of going, do you know what? If I want to be Lancelot, if I want to be Percival, I will do the impossible. I will set myself that impossible challenge, something that is for good. And so, I mean, just as Christ turned around and said it, if you don't have a sword, for the people who are going out to spread the gospel, if you don't have a sword, buy one, because your life is important for the word to continue. And I think these 9 knights to say, well, actually, if we want to be these heroes, we need this impossible cause to do it. And that's what I honestly think they went to do. 9 knights, they said, you know what? We will be the right hand of God. We will be that sword. We are the poor knights of Christ.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the other thing that they would have learned. Through the Crusades, yes, they talk about the moral thing of taking over Jerusalem, but it could be quite a lucrative thing, because besides taking Jerusalem, all the other Silk Road cities they would have taken, it was a lucrative deal. But they're actually opening saying, no, we're poor knights. We are literally going there to do what we can for the pilgrims.
They were very dedicated, weren't they? They were like the SAS almost of the time. You know, we know that they were armoured heavily and all of those sorts of things. But actually, in another sense, they were almost like Christian superheroes, because you'd have, at the time, people would look up to them. That was just the greatest thing to do, as children now look up to superheroes and all of their powers and feeling that they're special. It's the same thing, but I do question whether or not 9 knights could have had any influence across that pilgrim route. You know, were they able to do that? And one of the thoughts that springs to my mind is that we know, looking back at the history, that some of the places that people were mugged or, you know, were kind of robbed were watering holes. The Saracens would hide in the bushes or whatever, wait for them to stop, wait for them to set up camp, and then jump on them, because they would be taking a vast amount of money with them to be able to survive in Jerusalem for a certain period of time. So we know that, and I think that's something that's really interesting to look at. We've also got the fact that later on, something else we need to discuss really is where their name comes from. The Knights Templar is because, and again, there's a bit of subjecture about who agrees with who, but King Baldwin II's the king at the time. Did they go to him and say, can we look after the roots? Or did he go to them and say, could you look after the roots? I think there's still a bit of an argument about that. But essentially, they were given King Solomon's temple, a part of King Solomon's temple, to actually live on. You know, I think it was a stable. It was part of a palace, but the worst part, and that's where they were going to live. That's where they would keep the horses. That's where they would reside. But that is on top of where King Solomon's temple had apparently previously been.
I'm glad you added apparently.
Well, I'm only adding apparently because for your sake, because I know what you're going to say in a minute. And I can guess forward. But, you know, there is evidence of digging. And there is evidence of digging in that time period. And I think they had a map. I think they knew that there was treasure lost from King Solomon that they were going to find.
This is why, bless. No, it's, right, okay, let's take it off. I'm still holding true to this chivalric ideal.
Right.
That is, yes, it would have been virtually impossible for 9 knights. I mean, going back to the original comments, did they have previous knowledge? That I think, yes, they did. They would have known that the attack points were the watering holes, so that they could have concentrated their parts on that. But also, it could be the flip side. So there might have been logic as, well, that is going to be a major attack. We can't do that. There's only 9 of us, but we know on this road we can make a difference. Yeah. There's always something they can actually do. But this concept of getting, let's just say space, if nothing else, to actually be on the ground that they genuinely believe was King Solomon's temple, to me that still links to how the culture at the time recognised what these 9 knights were devoting themselves to.
Okay.
Because a case of, when they left, they're leaving everything. They are saying, we are devoting our life to this cause. And when I say life, it's not so it is to the moment I die, but with the assumption I'm going to get killed. Yes. And so they're going to virtually accept death. And so this is such a virtuous cause. It's easy how the frenzy of support comes behind it. And so if the king is going to go, do you know what? These are exceptional knights. These are people who are doing what we would say old school, but there's this new school that you're going to, I'm going to do this chivalrous thing, I'm going to protect the impossible.
Yes.
They're not taking any money because they're the poor knights of Christ and they're not doing it for profit. What would be the ultimate gift? Well, if you're going to be the right hand of God, then give them some of God's temple. Now this concept of digging. Yes, there is evidence of digging under the mat. I mean, they do call it King Solomon's temple, but I think that is the stables. but I do think that's a phrase that actually comes in a lot later. I think it's something that's added later. So we don't know if it is the worst part. It was just a part. But again, how much are we taking for fact that it was actually these 9 knights doing it? How do we know actually that it was only 9 knights that actually went? Did they have their servants with them? Did they have their stewards still looking after the horses? Were these guys digging underneath? Not necessarily because they were trying to find something, but when you've got the surface area is all gone, you can either build on top of it or you dig underneath it. Are you looking for something? Are you not? I think there's too much speculation on what could be obvious rather than, I've got a treasure map, I'm going to dig under it. Oh, yeah, but I can't let you get away with it. If there is actually the temple there anyway. I mean, it's important within Freemasonry that how significant King Solomon's temple is. But from a historical perspective, it's very unlikely that temple actually physically ever existed.
When you look at other people's commentary on this, it will go from people believing that they would, they weren't digging at all, they were just doing the pilgrim routes and that was it, to people in the middle kind of saying, well, they were doing the pilgrim routes, but in the evening or at the weekends, they were digging. But, in their spare time, they were also looking for something. They knew something was there and they were doing both and almost their purpose was to find something, but they were doing the other thing also. So the other way, where people say they didn't protect the pilgrim routes at all.
Yeah,
that's what they said they were going to do, but actually they turned up and they just started digging, and they were doing very little. And I think you get all different people saying different things, so it's really hard to know. And again, I like to buy into the fact that I think there's probably some digging going on. As I say, there's evidence that says at that time there was digging, which is great, and it shows there are tunnels there. We know that it's a place where there could have been hidden treasure, but again, it is so hard to know now. One thing I'd like to get onto is the fact that they were the poor Knights of Christ. We've said that a few times. That was what they named themselves. But they weren't very poor. Certainly not towards the end. So that's another piece of evidence on whether or not they found something. But if you do find a treasure, does that make you rich? If I was to go and find the menorah, for example, I've got the menorah, but it still doesn't give me any cash. I've got this object which I'm going to keep, and that's people's argument is that they kept these objects, but that doesn't make you any more rich. So I think again they're enigmatic in the fact that they've got these treasures and they carry these treasures with them. But how did that give them money? It didn't. We know how they got their money really, and that was because people would give them land. People would give them just money to keep them going because they felt they needed that. And these were noblemen. They were able to go and to have these conversations with people. So I think, going back to that, do you think there was a map involved in any way? I'll just check that with you again.
Dig it literally.
But also, what about the Ark and menorah? We know that those things existed. If we look through history, we see depictions of those things. There's certainly a lot of talk about those things. One other thing that the Knights Templar are known for...
Why don't they take notes of all these things
I'm asking?
Right, okay.
A lot of, as we said, it's a big topic. But one of the things that they are really known for, if you ask the man on the street, what are the Knights Templar known for? It would be the Holy Grail. But we have agreed before this, we're not going to talk about the Holy Grail today.
Because that definitely is a subject in its own right.
That's a subject in itself, because that will take us off into all different areas, which we're probably not going to do any justice today. So, the menorah, the Ark.
Okay.
Did they have those? Was there a treasure map?
Right. For a treasure map to pre-existed that they had in France, or they got whilst their first expedition over there, we'd have to look at the history in the sense. As I said, it's there's virtually no. I'm giving the very thinnest slither for those who have said, well, there's this one trinket that says, yeah, Solomon was actually here. The King Solomon's Temple didn't actually exist. So if there was any map to the treasures, it would have to be an invention later on anyway. But that doesn't mean that somebody did bury something, even a pretend ark or something under there for that they did discover. It couldn't have been the original in my eyes because they didn't actually exist. I mean, for instance, let's take the menorah to start off. eventually there's a temple there, and we know that there's another, we mentioned in a previous video, that there's another strong Jewish temple on the island of Elephant Island in Egypt.
There was.
And so it's likely that they'll have a menorah there. Okay. You go into any synagogue now, there'll be one. Most practicing people with Judaic faith would have one. And so the idea of having replicas, and of course, I mean, yes, when you're talking about treasures of it, there's obviously Titus, isn't it? His victory column where you see it engraved there. But we make the assumption that is the original menorah sort of thing. Well, as we know, there's first temple, second temple. There's been some temples going around. It's unlikely that any original one was found. It's unlikely that there's any map. The Ark of the Covenant, believe me, I lament it. I have a childhood of Indiana Jones. I loved it. I've even got an engraving on my wall that's similar to that one in the book where it's the Ark of the Covenant and the blazer, because I love it. I wanted it to exist. I love that thing of it being in Ethiopia, but the thing is, it doesn't exist. We can look at it from a theological point of view of where it comes into the story. We could talk about the Exodus from Babylon and the sense of how it's taking in Egyptian feelings of gods and arks. But the reality is, you say, it's factually there. It's in the into the Bible. Then it kind of loses an interest, it says, of being a point of God, until suddenly this priest turns around and says, oh, by the way, you're all unworthy, I'm going to hide it. Now, for that, I could understand that if the Templars go along and go, actually, we are interested in the Ark of the Covenant, there's a possibility it's buried under, and they'll be going to dig and find it. But that still then goes to the fact of, it, for me, doesn't actually really exist. But then that goes back on the wealth that says about people getting their money. And unfortunately for me, it still fits into this story of the popularity of chivalry and these guys really embedding it. We know it from several ways. We know that when knights joined, they gave up their estates and gave it to the order. Now, some cynical people might be turning around and say, well, that's them actively trying to make themselves into a powerful organisation to get money.
Yes.
But I also see it as a sense of, when you had the classical idea where an army invades by boat and then they burn the boats because they're turning around and saying, we're going to do or die. We have made a commitment. That's what we're doing. So when they give their lands to the order, they're not giving it to a member of the family so they can come back and say, do you know what, it was a really bad idea, can I have my house back? They're going, we're giving it away. And to me, I see it as very similar to what we have in Freemasonry. Which is a common thing between us. We have the concept of charity. Yes. Now, there's sometimes a misconception that our charity is we just give money to a charitable cause and well done, we've raised this is yours. Yeah. We know, well, both of us very much know, that's not what it's about. It's a case of, it's an individual challenge. You're going, actually, do I need this amount of daily? Do I need this amount of money? I don't. I will put that to charity as a concept. It's the virtue of charity. And so by a byproduct, our grand lodges, our lodges suddenly go, well, actually, because you've done this good thing of challenging yourself, we actually have this big pile of money. And then we give that a lump sum to charity.
Yes.
But we don't do it to give that lump sum. We do it as a personal challenge to go, how much do I have against somebody who doesn't have it? And I think that's very much the case here. I think it is a case of these knights, when they gave their land over for that the idea of, I am committing to this. I am really giving my life, my possessions. And then suddenly, actually, guys, we've got a lot of land here. Why don't we do it? Obviously, that creates power corrupts. And we see later on where possibly they weren't as virtuous as they could have been. And we go into that institutional part later. But then there's other things. As you say, there's donations coming in. And again, I think it goes to that same thing. It's a case of, if there is a person, if they've got this popularity towards this chivalrous ideal, there's going to be people who say, do you know what? I'm not a knight. I'm not going to go to battle. I'm not ready to leave home. Yeah. But I really love what you're doing. My sacrifice is I'm going to give you X amount. And I think that's another part where they get it. Not because there's any great esoteric concept to it. It's just this wonderful thing of personifying chivalry.
Okay, well, look, we can agree to disagree on the treasures because, I still think there is. You don't. At some point, we've got to move on. So let's move on from that and say, look, they were rich. They had money. We know they had money. They had wealth. But one of the things that's often put towards them is that their wealth come from this idea that they created the checking system. So we now know, and it's probably not so common today, but certainly 20, 30 years ago, people were constantly writing checks for the bank, and that's how you would exchange money with each other. And the Knights Templar thought of an ingenious idea. They knew that people coming from Europe to the Holy Land were going to struggle because they could be robbed, they could be mugged by the Saracens. So they felt, well, how can we enable them to leave their money in France and pick it up there? Well, of course, they had wealth in both places.
Yeah.
So they would go to the Paris preceptory, for example. They would say, I would like X amount of money when I get to Jerusalem, and they would sign that away. They'd have an IOU, and they would collect it at the other end. And it just made perfect sense. It enabled people to feel a lot more comfortable because, as I say, if you're going to the Holy Land for a couple of years, you need quite a bit of money to take with you, to survive. So really interesting. But I think that's one of the ways they built their money. It is said that under Catholic law, they weren't allowed to charge interest. So we don't really know how they earned money on that. But I think there would have been ways.
Yeah, I mean, the likelihood is there's a charging fee, isn't it? It's a case of they're not charged, because it's not a loan, is it?
No, it's not a loan, no.
They've given the money there.
Yeah,
and
they're just picking it up somewhere else.
They're picking up somewhere else. So there is the charge of, whatever, maybe a percentage, or no idea. But yeah.
It's a service. And with any service, you can charge for that. Or it could even be that because they're talking about two different currencies at the time, maybe, or different things like that, they may be able to squeak some money elsewhere.
Or if the person doesn't actually make it there, or he hasn't made it, but he's left his deposit.
Well, of course, where does the money go? So yeah, exactly. I think there are lots of ways they would have made money. But I think one of the interesting things for me is, why would people want to join this order?
Well, I think, I don't know, I'm saying the same thing, but it goes back to, again, I think at the beginning, I think it is that youthful passion they see this chivalric thing. We see the Grail legends hammer through this period. We see a change in this idea of honor, of virtue. We have the church promoting the virtues in their own sense. We have courtly love going on. We have all these things. And I think you see the first phase where they jump on the bandwagon. There's this case of, and they are a military order. And so if somebody is going to the military, as you say, they're elite. And I know people, nowadays now, say, I'm going to join the army. So, fantastic. And there's ones who go, I'm going to try and join the Marines.
Of course.
Because there's that passion to be the best of the best.
Yes.
But I think there's also a part, I think when we see it, when it starts really gaining momentum, again, I mean, drawing an analogy from Freemasonry, as we know, at the beginning, and it's a ruling now that every member is expected to be a virtuous man before they even start. It's one of the concepts. It makes good men better, which means you have to be a good man to start off with.
Of course.
How I got it, I have no idea, but that's the concept. So at the same time, I think where the Knights Templar then becomes a concept of if you are going to be a virtuous knight, then or virtuous person, then you would have been a Knights Templar. And so you would have joined to be seen as that. Just as in the Victorian period, we see a massive influx of members, not because they were virtuous, but, well, you can't be virtuous if you're not a Freemason. You're obviously not recognised. Yeah. So people socially had to join just because they had to be seen as being moral, even if they weren't. And I think it's the same thing you see with the Knights Templar. But unless you're going to...
Well, I was going to say there are other orders that they could join.
Well, of course, yeah. You've got... but that splits the two things up. But I thought what you were going to say is a case of when it goes even further, when it becomes a real industry...
Yeah.
Then people would have joined just for a career move.
Oh, of course.
You've got this power-broking organisation, makers of kings. You've got a banking system, which isn't just servicing merchants. We're talking, it's not just Jerusalem, we're servicing people who go to England, anywhere. We've got, as you say, they're called the kingmakers.
We see that in the church as well, you see that in any institution like that, where when it becomes a bigger organisation, it's not always about finance for yourself, it's sometimes just about power.
Exactly, and people go into it not because I feel I want to be a priest. It's actually, it's a good career move for me. I'm going to be here.
Yes.
Apologies to that. I'm just going to the history of certain religious bodies. But of course, as you say, there are other orders, and I think if you look at the other orders, you can see the business dynamic. I mean, the other famous ones you've got slightly the lesser out. I think I'll say the Teutonic order,
Yes.
which would be like the German lineage going through,
Yeah.
which followed very much in the same sort of vein. But it seems like because it followed later, it just was following the same, and so therefore it's the lesser cousin, you know.
Yeah, of course.
But then you've got, I think, which is fascinating, I can never pronounce it.
Hospitallers.
Yeah, exactly. And that they see the similar dynamic. You've got this order that's become incredibly popular, doing the chivalric thing of protecting the pilgrims.
Yeah.
They come up with the novel ideas, go, okay, who can we get? How about the ones they didn't protect? We create hospitals for them. And so we are giving to the worthy. And so they do it from that aspect. So you have these two orders, both surviving in popularity and growth, because they're both doing virtuous acts.
Yeah, and when we fast forward now towards the end of their reign, the Knights Templars, because, you know, spoiler alert for everybody watching, they do get disbanded.
Hang on. Spoiler up, 800 years later.
Yeah, exactly. But they do get disbanded, and the Hospitallers are asked at some point to join with them. The two Grand Masters are pulled together and said, "Do you want to join together and make a big order?" And they don't want to do that because, and there's some great reasons behind that. I think Jacques de Molay was the Grand Master at the time for the Knights Templar, and he said, "Our guys are joining our order to fight, to crusade, to be warrior monks.
Right.
What they don't want to do is go and attend people in hospital."
So cut your arm off, sew it back on for
Exactly.
you.
And, and I suppose in many senses, we talk so romantically about the Knights Templar, but these are fighters.
Yeah.
These are guys that want to go and fight. And they're not necessarily lovers. And the Hospitallers were lovers. They were people that would take care of people.
Yeah.
So there's a real big difference between the two of them. And I think that's something that...
But you've got that, but I think there's also, once again, I'm sorry, I bring in Freemasons as an analogy. We see that if you've got two well-established orders, we can say that they are poles apart, but of course, even now in a military, we'd have the army and you'll have the medical corps.
Yeah,
and our medical corps, very much so, they will serve the enemy as much as ourselves. It's I don't know if that's like a moral conduct that's coming later, but we do it. So they're not exactly poles apart. Maybe they were in that period. We have to judge it. But there is the other concept of power and prestige. In England, we generally accept of having one Grand Lodge. There are other lodges, but we have one Grand Lodge that services recognised craft Freemasonry. In America, could be up to 2 or 3 Grand Lodges in one state.
Yeah.
And woe betide you on Facebook going, "Hey guys, would it be easier if you just had one Grand Lodge?" No, that's suppressing our power, or now be usurped by this greater authority. Yeah. And I think that's another part. But didn't you say there was? I'm sure we had a conversation somewhere where you say about the other motivation of linking these two together was like a political move to try and destabilize.
Well, that's what I think. I think it was a political move really, because at the moment you've got the Grand Master of the Knights Templar who are very, very wealthy. How do we subtract some of that wealth? How do we get some of that power as well?
Yeah.
And I think by putting those two together, instantly you've got 2 Grand Masters. So maybe 2 people can't vote.
Yeah.
So if you put a third in, of course, is the third the king? Or is it? Were they looking to try and infiltrate? Is one of my theories.
I think infiltrate or to destabilise at least the pay by, isn't it? Yeah. I kind of agree with, because both are doing the jobs. Both are doing their jobs exceedingly well.
Yes.
And especially the Templar case, too well.
Yeah.
I would go for that destabilising thing.
And we know now, fast forwarding towards the end where they're dissolved, that just before that Prince Philip the Fair he's unhappy.
Yeah.
He's really unhappy.
Like I said, he's unhappy.
He's unhappy. He's very unhappy because, some say that he owed them money.
Yeah.
He owed the Templars money. And there's a big power struggle going on because if he hasn't got the money to pay them back, but you've got this massive organisation that are wealthy within your, within your kingdom, that is a big problem. And he was also said to have the Pope in his pocket.
Yep.
That the Pope was not even allowed to go back to the Vatican where he wanted to go. He was kept in France for a while because he was helping them. And, we have this edict that goes out to all of the local kind of police forces, whatever you would call them at the time, to say, on Friday the 13th, we want you to go and arrest all of the Templars. Go to their preceptories, go to wherever they are, and do that. And that went across Europe. That wasn't just in France. That went everywhere. And it had to be signed by the Pope. So is the king putting pressure on him? But both of them signed that to get that done. And of course they do that. Now, again, going back to the narrative that you see in most places, the Knights Templar are very wealthy.
Yeah.
And actually the king is really aware of how wealthy the Paris preceptory is, because he, in some political debate, gets almost run out. And he's in the streets and he jumps into the Paris preceptory, and the Templars look after him. They kind of say, no one can come in here, and he kind of hides out there for a little while. And he sees the wealth himself. And this is not that long before this edict goes out to arrest them all. But of course, they put the edict out, the police turn up, and they arrest Templars, but they find no treasure. Yeah. And it's almost, I've read that they had more wealth than England. We're not talking about a few...
Well, there's no difference now, really, is it? Yeah.
We're not talking about a few quid. We're talking about a lot of money. They had a lot there. And when they turn up to the Paris preceptory and temple there, nothing. Absolutely nothing. So my first theory... It's odd, but I think theory one. If they were aware that they were going to be arrested, why did the Templars stay? Because they get arrested, but the wealth is gone. Why don't they go? If it was me, I'd load up the truck, but I'd jump on the truck to go with it. I wouldn't want to be arrested.
I'm not sure about your Templar qualities.
Maybe that's why I'm not. But yeah, so what do you think on that? Do you think?
I mean, there is just so much there. I mean, I'll go for the bit. I mean, but Friday the 13th. It's meant to be October. Friday the 13th. It's the whole thing. Is why it's meant to be. It's meant to be the origin of being 13 being unlucky as a date, isn't it? Is, yeah. I do. Even if the king wasn't heavily in debt, or if he did, I think the whole concept of having this incredible power force on his land, that even if he wasn't financially indebted to, he would be indebted to for aid, for... I mean, they were void of tax, weren't they? Yes. And bits and pieces like that. That's too much on your doorstep.
And that's half of the problem. If they're not paying tax,
there's
no
land,
use to it.
Own land, earning all this money off the land, they can't do anything. So I think the motivation is there. The visit to seeing the treasure, love to be true, because I can imagine one point it being made up to justify this idea of treasure and stuff like that. But I can equally imagine it being the last straw for the king of going, they're here, oh God, they've got this as well. It being says, right, I need money, they've got that, I just get this sorted. So I believe all that part. But going on to your question, a sense of why the few there, I'm sorry, it takes me back to that original thing of this chivalric idea that, for me, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, does the last act of... He takes it right back to that core value and says, guys, they do get the warning. Because, I mean, how big is that organisation? They would have had families in...
Of course
they would have other debts going in. And, of course, if the rumour comes out, because you say it's like a month in advance they got... The orders went out.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be like a case they got the note in the morning going, oh, lads, right, okay, apparently we're storming the Templars tonight. Yeah. There would have been preparation beforehand. So I'm sure they got a warning. But equally, it's like a case of, I imagine there was not absolute certainty that the knights would have gone, yeah, okay. I mean, imagine it. You refer to the policeman knocks on the door, where you've got this guy who's more likely fought in battles in Palestine, sort of thing, nose crushed, and the policeman going, you're under arrest, we come for your treasure, with the whole faith that the guy's going to go, yeah, all right, and you come, sorry, whoa, fair cop.
It's not like they're armed with swords or anything.
Exactly, yeah. So it's so I imagine that there would have been a bit of unrest, the sense of, are we actually going to be able to do this? Even though the king's done it, the pope's done it, are these guys actually going to give it up? And I can quite believe that Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, turns around and says, right, guys, we can't evacuate. If we do, we're rumbled.
Yes.
They know the treasure's gone. We know we found out. Some of us have got to stay behind. If I leave, maybe he was too much of an instant figure. So hang on, suddenly Jacques de Molay's disappeared. Or maybe he did it as a sense of, I will stay here and stand for the order. We're going to go down. but I will stand here. Who's willing to stay? And there's the vanguard that stays, opens the door and goes in. The romantic in me, that's as far as romantic you're going to get in the sense of this story. But I love that ideal.
And that's the thing, we talk about this from a mystery perspective. We know that, there are writings that you can go and find, and that's why we try and tee these topics up for people to watch, because we feel that there are so many great mysteries that that people can get into, but they're hard to get into because certainly there are a lot of very rich, thick Knights Templar history books, but to get to those mystery elements is quite difficult. So that's why we try and tee this up, and that leads me into thinking more about what happens later, which is the real gritty stuff. Yeah, they get arrested, and thinking back to what you were saying about that, Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master of this. If you're the Grand Master of such a wealthy, big organisation, you're going to know other wealthy, big people. So that leak, I think, is really possible. If it's been with the police commissioner or whatever it would be at the time for a month, there's there may have been a time when those two people cross paths and sort of make sure you haven't got any treasure in there. Okay, and by the way, don't use your sword on the way out.
Friday 30s, be out.
Yes. So that is a possibility. But once they're arrested, we then start to hear about what happens, because we've got to, from the French point of view, they've got to level them with something. What are they doing wrong, essentially? And there is talk that the king had people go in and infiltrate them. So there was rumours coming out that certain things were happening, but they were tortured. There's no other way of saying it. They were taken in and tortured and asked lots of questions, and lots of different things come from lots of different people. But essentially, they were accused of things like idol worship, worshipping other things to Christianity or God, sodomy, with each other, really, and most importantly, heresy. That was the real one that I think they went for. And so under torture, they would say these things. But more recently, we've seen that a letter was found, I think, in the Vatican archives from the Pope at the time, who sort of tries to absolve himself of doing this because he wasn't happy with what had happened. But his men at the time also inquired, but they didn't talk.
Inquired. I say chaps, yes.
But they also sat down with these men and tried to find out what they were doing.
I'm sorry. Sat down, inquired, and sat down with these men. Somehow I'm thinking, I'm not exactly sure the letter goes in there. So, we asked the chaps what they were doing. Sorry, God.
But that's how it feels when you look at what the King's men were doing. They were really putting the pressure on them and torturing them. But the Pope's men were slightly different because they were trying to be fairer about this, and they were trying to find out exactly what was happening. And they got the same messages. They got the same messages, that there were these things like the Templars would spit on the cross of Christ during initiation ceremonies, and they would kiss the mouth of the initiator, and also the back and the navel, and lots of weird things. So we see on one hand that, you get the argument that they were tortured, so they were just saying anything to stop the torture. But you get the other argument is, why were they not clean and tidy when they're talking to the Pope's men? So, did they have an initiation ceremony? Is the first
that involved
thing to
all
look
those
at. That
bits
involved all of those things. And for my money, I think if they did, and I believe they did, they would have an initiation ceremony to join. But a lot of this would be, again, going back to things like Freemasonry, but other societies at the time. These would be almost plays to give them an idea, to explain to them things that might happen in the Holy Land. If you're captured, you see it with people like the SAS. They'll do these kind of fake dummy runs where they'll take them in and they'll waterboard people and everything like that. And these are their own members, but they're getting them ready for what could happen. To make sure they don't break in that situation.
Masonically it says that we have the ritual where a guy is actually victimised to release secrets. So they go through the process of doing it, and the lesson of that is, that's what he's willing to give up, not to give the secrets. It's an interesting thought. But I suppose there's several things to cover. I mean, let's cover this letter. It's a case of, it could be genuinely saying, look, my guys just invited them down, have a chat. Hi, you've been doing anything wrong? Or it could be something that he knows that the thing wasn't popular.
Yes.
I don't know when this letter was actually written. So I don't know if it's like something, it's a disclaimer after the event saying that, because I'm sure it wasn't always all popular. Everyone was going, yeah, great, Templars have gone. I know we have Walter Scott's writes. I mean, to be honest, we have Walter Scott when he wrote. I don't know, about 1800s or something. Maybe Mazzolio writes Ivanhoe, and he has the main protagonists of the Templars. But with his writing, we're very passionate about them now, but they kind of died off in our passion. But he brought them back in. But what I'm saying is a case of we have his testimony. We don't know if that is actually factual or something he's trying to water it down, like making it sound like it was a friendly chat.
Yeah.
But we do have these things of, yes, parallel testimony comes out. Yes, it could be part of initiation ceremony, so therefore it's all local. Or it could be, as we also know from, even when we look at historical, where people have been wrongly convicted of a crime, where the police subject a potential who they suspect the person has done it, and say badger them, they deprive them of sleep, and just badger them with the things. It was you. This is what you did, wasn't it? This is what you did, wasn't it? Yeah. And they can do it. I mean, what the other things part we have is they did need a conviction, and so they would need to, for the conviction to say that. It would be better if they all said the same thing. So if the top interrogator said, right, okay, I bet, guys, they did this, and this. Yeah. Ask them those explicit questions, and they go through the torture, so the names are all the same, so it comes out this parallel.
Of course.
But this concludes in two things. Do I believe that there was an actual ritual? Yes, I do. I I think that the order is so powerful, and that there would have been, it wouldn't have been just Jones, lovely, stand over there, one sword, one cup, off you go. It would have been something. I don't think it would have been universal. I think one part because of maybe languages, but I also think, as we know in Freemasonry, that rituals we do in England can vary. We know that there's long ones, we know there's shorter versions, we know when we're going to get our meal earlier or we're going to get it later. Yeah. We know in America they could be completely different to a degree. We know the essence is there, but the wording will change, the parameters will change. So I can believe that there were rituals. But the last part would be like a case of, do we see the rituals as being, I'm trying to think of...
well, like strange, there's talk about these rituals having, as I say, them being led to a cross for Christ and spitting on them. Yeah. We've got the talk of Baphomet.
That's what I was going to mention. Apologies.
About, the head of John the Baptist.
Yeah. No, sorry. I want to try and think of that other part. You're quite right. It's the Baphomet thing that gets me. Out of all the things that we have in it, I can see the universality, but this is one word that comes out of Baphomet, which of course we see so used afterwards. Of course, yeah. Which you're far more familiar with than me. I am. It goes through doors I don't normally go into. But but I know that some people argue it's a corruption of Muhammad and stuff like that. But it's such a unique word, and even if you break it down linguistically, now for me that could be. I love the idea of it. We know that we have several words. Specific secret words, ones that are relevant to the degree, but we have some lovely ones which are just used literally in the process of going from one degree to the other, which are literally passwords. Yeah, I would love to think that Baphomet is one of those passwords. Yeah, that it's something that is not as significant as the main ones, but it's one that everybody will know.
Yeah, all the Templars would know that, as all Freemasons would know the first degree or second degree password.
Yeah, it's something you feel safe to reveal.
Yes.
To a degree, you feel like you're giving something. But I love it. That's the one thing within the whole thing where you would get me on. Whereas the case of, do you think there's anything there? Baphomet is the one.
Yeah, Baphomet's really interesting. And later on, we see a depiction by Eliphas Levi of Baphomet where for me, it's a figure of balance, a beautiful figure of balance. It's half man, half female. It's sort of the black moon, the white moon, and there's alchemy in there. It's amazing. But I think in looking at that the word's been used and maybe some of the symbology, but I don't think it's said that they were worshipping a goat's head. Yeah, and I think that's what they call Baphomet. But I don't think it was. It was.
Yeah, I think there's certain things where. We've linked it. People want to be that, isn't it? They link it to different bits and pieces. But I like there was one where someone did a translation using, I think it's the Ashbash cipher, right? Where you turn it into Hebrew, and there's a certain thing which apparently it does actually work. And it comes into Sophia, so therefore meaning wisdom.
Nice.
Which is, again, I love that idea from so many perspectives.
And there's so much people can wrap themselves around with this. I mean, again, they were said to be worshipping the head of John the Baptist. Another thing that again was that found around Jerusalem and brought back, and all of these things. There's so much people can go out there and find out, and there's so much more we're going to talk about in a second episode about this, because we've still got pirates, we've still got treasure stuff. There's lots of stuff we can discuss.
That's going to be a short episode.
But look, thanks so much for joining us for this episode. We've really enjoyed doing this, and we'll see you again in the next one.
Thank you.